The first takeaway point that I had from the Marsh text was that all of the leaders highlighted really capitalized on their opportunities to influence. So, for example, Martin Luther King Jr., in his first year at his church, preached 46 times. He did 7 guest sermons, and he spoke 13 times doing lectures to secular venues. He leveraged his power for good. So, wherever you're at in your power position, be it a teacher, parent, healthcare provider, pastor, government worker, organizer of a farm like Jordan was, or the leader of an organization like the SNCC. Um, People used every opportunity they could to influence people, to try to change hearts, to try to open up minds. Um, and in doing so, the 3 elements of theology, community, and justice inform each other. Leveraging your power for good means leveraging it to bring about justice. Leveraging your power to bring glory to God means fulfilling the gospel, and the theology of the gospel essentially is love and justice. And then lastly, leveraging power to establish God's kingdom on earth requires that we do so in community. That means that we need to recognize and be sensitive to the needs of the community. We need to be aware and always looking for what those needs would be. We need to know who in our community or with whom we can partner to make things happen. But then we also need to know who in our community might be a barrier to that and how to work with that or against that. Using your power for good means that you have to be able to mobilize people to get results. My favorite quote from this entire book was on page 23, where it says, Jesus was not merely a utopian dreamer, but the incarnate truth of God, enabling the church and its people to work and fight and to keep talking. The word incarnate or incarnation was frequently used throughout this book, which I think is a very empowering word to envision each one of us as having the potential to be the incarnation of God here on earth. And also when it says Jesus enabled the church and its people, it really means God gives us the authority to act on his behalf, to make the theology happen in our communities, and to bring about justice. The second main point that I drew was that all of these leaders were incredibly strategic. I thought of Esther in the Old Testament. She was very strategic and patient. She didn't just pounce on her first opportunity to make a difference with her husband, but she waited and she played the game a little bit. We can see Martin Luther King Jr. doing that in his church. He really studied his audience and he knew what he needed to do to lay the foundation for his eventual work. He knew that he had to be charismatic. He knew that he had to be professional. In contrast to his predecessor, who was a little bit of a loose cannon. We also see that with Jordan on his farm or farm community. They fulfilled kind of their initial mission or goal, and then there was a period of time where they had to wait and see. We don't maybe know what our next purpose is, but we can work through the waiting until that next mission or purpose for us becomes apparent. Jesus is a great example of being strategic, and we see this played out theologically in the gospel, where he didn't just throw around his magic, or he didn't throw around his miracle working in his words and works like magical pixie dust, but he did so with great strategic intentionality. And in those last days of his life, the passion of the Christ doesn't mean some sort of emotional thing. What it means is that he took every step with great intention all the way to Calvary, knowing that it was to serve the ultimate purpose of reconciliation of man and God. Part of being strategic means enlisting others. And this is theologically crucial to us making any sort of justice happen here on earth. The Bible is full of times when God says alone isn't good, starting with his first creation of human, recognizing that man should not be alone. ranging all the way to the life of Jesus, where sometimes he retreated and was alone, but he had his posse, he had his people, and it's just vital that you surround yourself with the right people strategically, so that you can make things happen. The examples that we see from King and the SNCC, for example, is that they both enlisted secular venues, non-believers, non-Christians, knowing that the church could be the answer to the solution, or be the answer to the problem. The church has the solution, so let's partner with other people in our culture, even if they don't believe the same things that we do, to make things happen, versus having the church have one view on a social issue and secularism has a different view, and then we're fighting on it all the time. So I thought that was really smart on their parts. But their goals and strategies were different, because their end game was more results based, where they needed a law changed, and that can be a little bit easier to measure and more apparent. However, in the case of Perkins, for example, and the Voice of Calvary movement, they were more about ideals than they were about results. They didn't believe in a universal brotherhood where we had to connect with staunch non-believers, because they were more about saving souls. And then you see this kind of fusion of those two ideologies with Jordan, where he recognized that sometimes you have to work with the social or with the sinful infrastructure that you have in front of you to make things happen, but that you can't just be satisfied with that. He talked about the analogy of a mule. If you trade out one politician for another, you just get a different one-eyed mule who's missing the opposite eye. I love when he told the lady in church, are you going to follow your granddaddy, or are you going to follow Jesus? And he talked about how changing the rules was fine, but it just wasn't enough, that it really came down to having a born-again faith. So no one approach or strategy is right or wrong. They were all different, with different end games in mind. The third point that I really found throughout the book was that everyone's efforts were gospel-centric. The theology of the gospel is love. That was made very clear by Jesus. Perkins said that redistribution of wealth is faithful embodiment of agape, or love. And he also said that the economics have to change. Otherwise, the entire validity of the gospel is at stake. Jesus talked about economics and money more than any other topic. So if we're going to have a gospel-centric approach to social justice, then we need to recognize the connection between love, justice, and economics. In doing so, again, you have to look for and be responsive to the needs of your community. You have to know with whom in your community you can partner, and you have to know who in your community will be your barrier in order to pull all that together. So with all that being said, what my church needs to do is have a paradigm shift of our view of service. So in my head, I have this idea of service being 3 different tiers. On the top tier, you have donating money or goods to try to put a temporary Band-Aid on a problem. The second tier is more involved, hands-on service, but they are one-time events or short-term sort of things. Again, putting a Band-Aid on a problem. Right now I'm in Kara Powell's Faith Longevity class, and she refers to that type of service as being a drive-by service, where it feels good and it looks good and it sounds good, especially on your church's Facebook page, but the likelihood of transforming hearts and making a long-lasting faith impression on either the person doing the service or the receiver of it is pretty low. So how do we get to that third tier, that deep level of service? And that's the level where advocacy, mentorship, and relationships happen. And it's through that that you truly can achieve social justice in the long run. So our church right now is focused on small group ministry. However, the groups are formed by people who are like-minded, similar age, similar places in life. So we've just become a church with a lot of cliques. if you keep eating the same thing that you've been fed, you are not likely to be transformed. So I think in regards to building relationships, transforming hearts, the church needs to use both the opportunity to influence as well as employee strategies to put people together, to focus on that gospel-centric message of love and justice. So put a high school girl with an 80-year-old in an assisted living center, or partner, or maybe an empty nester couple that are successful business owners with a new couple that's struggling financially. Try to put people together so that they can truly learn and grow in ways that they had never thought possible. So that would be my suggestion for our church, to maybe take a little message from the writing of Marsh.